What does it mean that during the Great Tribulation, Jerusalem will be encompassed by armies because its desolation is near? Just what does that mean? We're going to look at that in this video. We've been working on a series of YouTube videos about the Olivet Discourse. This was a discourse when Jesus was on the Mount of Olives during the Passion Week. He spoke it to his disciples. The prophecy had to do with the destruction of the temple in Jerusalem. Not one stone would be left upon another. The disciples, of course, had two questions. When will these temples buildings be destroyed? And secondly, what is the sign of the end of the world and the second coming? So the whole Olivet Discourse in Matthew, Mark, and Luke, it had all together to do with which is known as the Great Tribulation. It's the time period of intense tribulation on the church prior to the second coming of Christ, and then also the last day and the second coming of Jesus Christ. Please consider subscribing to this channel. There's a little red button in the bottom right hand corner. Just a quick review on the order of prophetic events. There's the church age, some 2,000 years. There's an apostasy right at the end of that period. I believe we're in that now. The church is falling away. There's people falling away from the church. Then there's a little season of the Great Tribulation. And it's a Great Tribulation on the false church, Babylon. There's the Antichrist. There's the abomination of desolation, false Christ, false prophets. In this video, we're going to look at Jerusalem being encompassed or sieged by armies because its desolation is near. And the last day comes, the second coming of Christ that ushers in eternity. The Great Tribulation in the Olivet Discourse is given to us in four parallel views. And we've been working through these views. We're actually on view number 3, which talks about the abomination of desolation, Jerusalem being encompassed. It's the Great Tribulation. And God's people flee to the mountains. So we're going to look at that in this video. Just a quick overview of view number 3. The problem is that Jerusalem is compassed by armies. And we're going to look at that. Its desolation is near. In other passages in Matthew and Mark, it's called the abomination of desolation, standing in the holy place, which is worldliness in the church. It's the Great Tribulation. Jerusalem compassed has some similar meanings about being squeezed or tightened with the Great Tribulation. Jerusalem will be trodden down by Gentiles, and except those days are shortened, no flesh will be saved. And God's response is that they flee to the mountains, and we're going to look at all of these in the upcoming videos. The key passage we're going to look at today in this video, when you see Jerusalem compassed with armies, that word compass there is the Greek word kuklo. It's to encircle. It's also called a siege. When a city is sieged, it's surrounded by armies. And we're going to look at that in this video, that Jerusalem had previously been sieged, and notably in the Babylonian captivity. And the desolation occurs because there's famine. People are leaving, people are trying to get away. It becomes empty, and we're going to look at the desolation of Jerusalem in the next video. There is a parallel passage in Luke 19, which we'll look at a little bit later in this video, but it says basically the same thing. Thine enemies shall cast a trench about thee, and compass thee around, keep thee in on every side, lay thee even with the ground. In other words, destroy the city, thy children within thee, and they shall not leave then one stone upon another. That's the key phrase that's in the Olivet Discourse. Not one stone upon another. It's pointing to the dissembling or the disunity of the church. And we already see that in progress today. As I mentioned a couple moments ago, this siege or this encompass in Jerusalem, it's very similar to the Greek root meanings of the words for tribulation and distress. The siege is essentially a tribulation of stress and constraint. When we look at Matthew 24:9, Matthew 24:21, there shall be great tribulation. It's also talked about in Mark 13, great tribulation. That word afflicted in Matthew 24:9, the word tribulation in Matthew 24:21. It's the Greek word thlipsis. It literally means pressure, and it's mostly translated as tribulation many times in the New Testament. But it has to do with pressure, and that's what a siege is. It puts pressure on a city because they're not able to get to food. They're not able to go out in the fields. They're kind of trapped and they're being starved. We see in Luke 21, we see the same thing. There should be great distress in the land and wrath upon his people. And that's in the context of Jerusalem being encompassed. There'll be great distress in the land, wrath upon the people. And that word for distress is the Greek word anake, which literally means constraint, distress, necessity. It's the same thing. So when we see the Great Tribulation and we see Jerusalem compassed with armies, it's talking about the same event. It's talking about the Great Tribulation. In order to fully understand this passage about the encompassing of Jerusalem, which is tribulation, we need to understand the symbolic meaning of Jerusalem in the Bible. And what does that mean? We've done this in other videos, and we have a whole video which I'll tag on this slide. So if you want to get into that in more detail, please look at the video I tag on this slide. But we're just going to do a review now over the next couple slides so we understand the symbolic meaning of Jerusalem. We see, for example, in Revelation 21, this is for eternity. I, John, saw the holy city, New Jerusalem, coming down from God out of heaven, prepared as a bride adorned for her husband. The bride, of course, is God's people. New Jerusalem refers to the dwelling place of God and his people for eternity. The tabernacle of God is with men, and he will dwell with them. They shall be his people, and God himself shall be with them. I will show you the bride, the Lamb's wife, and show the great city, the holy Jerusalem, descending from heaven. It has to do, the Jerusalem has altogether to do with the location or the dwelling place of God's people. Now, I've mentioned we've done another video on this, and we have all these facts in that video. We just looked at the New Jerusalem as the bride of Christ. Jerusalem is where God puts his name forever. Of course, that's going to be where God's people dwell. The church was first established at Jerusalem, Acts 1:15. The church is symbolized as a temple or as a house of God, which of course was at Jerusalem. Christians have come to the city of God, Hebrews 12:22. Christians are referred to as spiritual Jews. Christians are referred to as spiritual Israel. All of these facts and more underscore that Jerusalem is where God's people dwell. Now, of course, in the earthly church, the nominal church in this world, which is also where God's people dwell, but they're mixed in with saved and unsaved. So the church, which ultimately in the last day becomes Babylon, they can be mixed together. We recall the parable of the wheat and the tares, where the wheat and the tares, they grow together into the harvest. And there's many people in this nominal church of this world that's called Jerusalem spiritually. Matthew 7:21-23. Not everyone that says unto me, Lord, Lord, shall enter into the kingdom of heaven. There's many people in churches today that say they're a Christian. Many of the leaders in the church, probably the majority of them and more, are thinking that they're Christian, and they teach false doctrine. They teach false gospels. They teach false prophecy. They're in it for the money. They condone materialism. They love the world and the church. It's not those that say, Lord, Lord, it's he that does the will of my Father in heaven. Many will say to me in that day, Lord, Lord, haven't we prophesied in thy name? And in other words, haven't they taught the Bible, and they taught the false prophecy of pre-tribulation, etc.? And in thy name cast out devils, and in thy name did many wonderful works. Look at this great church they built. And then will I profess unto them, I never knew you, depart from me, ye that work in iniquity. So it's important to remember that the Jerusalem of this world and this earth has always contained both saved and unsaved. And that's how the Jerusalem is a symbolic term that refers to where God's people dwell, the church. But in this world, in this earth, it's mixed with saved and unsaved. And during the Great Tribulation, it becomes overrun with the unsaved. Now we're going to turn now and we're going to look at Jerusalem being compassed about. It's surrounded. What does that mean? And again, in the Olivet Discourse, some people try to literalize all this, and that's not what it means. It's a spiritual tribulation. It's a spiritual constraint. Now, the most notable siege of Jerusalem occurred by the Babylonians. It was called the Babylonian captivity. They sieged the city of Jerusalem. They ultimately overran the city. They were taking people captive. But this thing about the Babylon captivity, a significant amount of the Bible concerns the Babylon captivity of the Old Testament. Roughly 25% can in one way or the other be related to it. And we see, for example, other than 2 Kings and 2 Chronicles, the major prophets. Isaiah was an earlier prophet, but he spoke before of that captivity. Jeremiah was the prophet of God during the captivity, during the siege of Jerusalem. He was in Jerusalem, as well as he wrote Lamentations after Jerusalem was destroyed. Ezekiel was the prophet contemporaneous with Jeremiah, but he was the one outside of Jerusalem in exile. He was taken captive, as well as Daniel was taken captive. So all of that information in the Bible, which is extensive, all has to do with the Babylonian captivity. Also, minor prophets such as Hosea, Joel, Amos, Obadiah, Micah, Habakkuk, Zephaniah, all have to do with this Babylonian captivity. It's a huge event. And even the post-exilic, once the people were coming back to Jerusalem, Ezra, Nehemiah, Haggai, Zechariah, they all had to do with the outcome, if you will, and they point to the future of prophecy going forward. So the Babylon captivity is hugely significant, and it does apply. It's a parallel to the Olivet Discourse. The Olivet Discourse is simply a shorter version of it. But the Babylon captivity has altogether to do with the Great Tribulation. It's a type of the Great Tribulation. And we've done a video on that recently already. We've done other ones in the past as well. But the captivity, it was a 70-year prophecy in Jeremiah 25 that they would be taken for 70 years, and it occurred between 606 to 536 BC approximately. And again, we talked about Ezekiel, Jeremiah, Daniel. There's multiple deportations to Babylon, Daniel, Ezekiel. The final siege of Jerusalem, the final encompassing of it was in 587 BC. It lasted roughly a year and a half. And Jerusalem was destroyed in 586 BC. And then the land was desolate. And we're going to look at desolate again, of course, in the next video. And it kept its Sabbath 50 years. And all that has spiritual meaning. Okay, let's now just look at a verse in Jeremiah 32, the siege of Jerusalem. The word that came to Jeremiah from the Lord in the 10th year of Zedekiah, king of Judah. He was the final king of Judah, which was the 18th year of Nebuchadnezzar. He was the king of Babylon. He's a type, if you will, of the Antichrist. For then the king of Babylon's army, besieged Jerusalem. Besieged, that word sir again, it means to cramp or confine. The same root meaning of the Great Tribulation, with the word tribulation, distress, and it has to do with the same idea. Because all of that information in those prophetic books of the Old Testament point to the final Great Tribulation. They're all helpful in understanding what it will look like. And the result of that siege was famine. And it was cannibalism because they had no food. And those things have symbolic meanings. Okay, just a reminder, and I'll tag a video we've done on this slide. It's important to understand why Babylon is a type of the false church. So when Babylon besieges it means that the church is being surrounded by unsaved people. But the church is being sieged by people in the church that are unsaved. And we go through all these reasons why it refers to the false Christian church. So if you want, please take a look at that video we've done. I'll tag it on this slide. Now, a siege of a city back in those days results in famine. And we've done a video, of course, on the famine that's in the Olivet Discourse. It's a spiritual famine. But let's look at it in 2 Kings 25. Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, the type of the Antichrist, he and all his host, his army of unsaved people that are in the church, against Jerusalem, against God's people, the city was besieged. And of course, famine prevailed in the city, and there was no bread for the people of the land. And we see similar, Ezekiel 4, which is just another parallel passage. Behold, I will break the staff of bread in Jerusalem, that they may want bread and water and consume away for their iniquity. And we see again, there's parallel passages to the famines that we've already looked at a video. I'll tag that on this slide. There shall be famines in the Olivet Discourse during the Great Tribulation. But they're not literal physical famines. It's a spiritual famine for the hearing of the Word of God. Amos 8:11 and 12, Deuteronomy 8:3, Matthew 4:4, especially Amos 8. It's a famine for hearing the Word of God. Other spiritual cannibalism that happened during the siege. They were so hungry, Jeremiah 19:9, I will cause them to eat the flesh of their sons and the flesh of their daughters, and they shall eat every one of the flesh of his friend in the siege. They were so hungry, there was cannibalism. Ezekiel 5, because of all thine abominations, all the wickedness that was done in the church, all the worldliness that has entered the church, and we see it already today. The father shall eat the sons in the midst of thee, and the sons shall eat their fathers. And we want to understand, though, when it talks about devouring one another and eating one another, what's the spiritual meaning of that? Because surely in the Great Tribulation that's very soon to occur, it's not about physically eating people. It's a spiritual meaning. And we remember that whosoever hates his brother is a murderer. To eat the flesh is to kill that person. You're going to kill them by eating them. And we see that in Olivet Discourse, father against son, son against father, etc. Family issues and family betrayals. But we see it's a spiritual meaning. Galatians 5, for all the law is fulfilled in one word, even in this, thou shalt love thy neighbor as thyself. But if you bite and devour one another, and of course that's not literally devouring them, but it's a spiritual meaning, take heed that you not be consumed one of another, because of a lack of love. And it's a lack, the ultimate reason for that is a lack of the Word of God, and it results in a lack of love, and there's devouring, there's betraying of people against each other, and they devour and they bite each other because they don't love each other. Spiritual cannibalism in the Olivet Discourse. They shall deliver you up to be afflicted and kill you. You should be hated of all nations for my name's sake. Many shall be offended. They shall betray one another. That's what we just saw. In Galatians, one another. You devour one another. You will hate one another. Luke 21:16, a parallel passage. You should be betrayed by parents and brethren and kinsfolk and friends. Some of you they shall cause to be put to death because they're biting and devouring one. There's no Word of God. It's a spiritual famine. A spiritual famine leads to eating, devouring one another, hatred for one another. Okay, we're going to shift gears a little bit. We're going to look at this thing about a siege in the Old Testament, and we're going to look at Luke 19 in a moment. You're kept in on every side, and we're going to look at that in the next slides. Okay, the parallel passage that we already mentioned earlier, Luke 19, thine enemies shall cast a trench about thee, they compass thee around, and they keep thee in on every side. Keep thee in on every side. And when we look at that word keep thee in, it's the Greek word syneko. It literally means to hold together, and it means to constrain. Again, it's a great tribulation. It's Luke 19 covers the Great Tribulation as well. And they go beyond that. And the every side, it's pantothen. It means all around or every side. Everywhere you look, the church is surrounded. The church is going to be overrun by unsaved people. It's going to be overrun by Satan's kingdom. It's going to be overrun by the king of Babylon, the false Christian church, and all of its people. And it results in, they're going to lay thee even to the ground, thy children with thee, they shall not leave in thee one stone upon another, because thou knew not the time of thy visitation. And again, not one stone upon another is desolation. The church is going to be laid desolate. And that's what happens when Jerusalem is compassed about. It leads to spiritual famine, it leads to biting and devouring, and not one stone upon another will be left by the time the Great Tribulation is over. Babylonian captivity, that same concept about keeping thee in, it's called fear is on every side. Jeremiah 6, we have heard the fame thereof, our hands wax feeble. This is what the Great Tribulation is going to be about. Anguish has taken hold of us, pain as a woman in travail. And we saw that in a video we did earlier in this series. Go not forth into the field, nor walk by the way, for the sword of the enemy, and fear is on every side. God's people that are trapped in Jerusalem, they just see Satan's kingdom all around them. They're trapped, they're constrained, they're being silenced, they're being forced to leave and flee. They're in a worldly church. It's the abomination of desolation. The church is becoming desolate. Also, Jeremiah 20, I heard the defaming of many, fear on every side. All my familiars watch for my halting, saying peradventure he will be enticed. We shall prevail against him. They want you into their game they're playing, their worldliness game of false teaching and false doctrine and the love of the world and all the worldly things that go on in the church. And we shall take our revenge on him. It's the persecutions of Jeremiah was heavily persecuted. There was false prophets there telling him that, oh, everything is fine. There's all type of things that Jeremiah was persecuted by. He was thrown in a pit. He was isolated. He was silenced. All those things are what can happen in the Great Tribulation to God's people. Okay, quickly we're going to look at the armies of the enemy. We've talked about the encompassing what that involves with famine and with the devouring of one another and the persecutions. But we want to understand clearly the armies of the enemy. So when we do that, we recall verses we've looked at before. It's a spiritual issue. It's not physical. It's spiritual. We wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities, powers, against rulers of darkness of this world. Spiritual wickedness in high places. And that's why we take up the whole armor of God, because we're in this spiritual warfare. No man entangles himself with the affairs of this life. And that's what the church wants you to do, to get entangled with their worldliness and their false teaching and their love of the world and their politics. But we have to be a soldier. Our spiritual adversary, always underlying in all this, is Satan. Revelation 12, when the dragon saw he was cast to the earth, he persecuted the woman and brought forth the man-child. The dragon was wroth with the woman and went to make war with the remnant of her seed. The dragon is the one that's making the war. He's the one that's causing the siege. He's causing this spiritual battle. And it's against the remnant of her seed, those that keep the commandments of God and have the testimony or witness of Jesus Christ. Again, the woman there is a type of the church, the type of God's people. Be sober, be vigilant. Your adversary, the devil, as a roaring lion, walks about seeking who he may devour. Just a reminder, we've done videos on this. Wars and rumors of wars. That's what happens in the Great Tribulation, but they're not physical wars. They're spiritual wars. Wars and commotions, don't be terrified. They will happen, but just a reminder that Satan is bringing warfare against the church. It's the last days. It's the Great Tribulation. It's a siege of Jerusalem, but its purpose is warfare. The war, we've looked at this. I'm just going to list these, and you can reference this. You can pause the video and look at this. The spiritual battle. There's a huge spiritual battle in the Olivet Discourse. We've covered this on many videos already. But it's all about this war that Satan's kingdom is unleashing on God's people. And again, as far as killing God's people in this war, in the book of Revelation, which we've done a whole series on, we see the killing of God's people spiritually all through the book of Revelation. And these are some examples. And note the one on the bottom, the two on the bottom. The false prophet deceives, kills whoever will not worship the image of the beast. The image of the beast is the false church itself, and we've done a video on that. And Babylon by sorceries, all nations were deceived, and was found in her the blood of the prophets and the saints. So we see this warfare that goes on. The Antichrist also, and we're not going to go through these, and we've done videos on the little horns and the king of the north, which are all types and symbols of the Antichrist. In Daniel 7, 8, and 11, there is a war. The little horn makes a war with the saints and prevails. It looks like Satan's kingdom is prevailing because the church is being crumbled down, not one stone upon another. The little horn destroys the mighty and holy people, causes craft or deceit to prosper, and by peace, when there is no peace, destroys many. The king of the north, also another type of the Antichrist, shall fall by the sword, by flame, by captivity, by spoil many days. That's what happens to God's people. They're being persecuted. Gog and Magog compass God's people. This is in the book of Revelation, Revelation 20. We've done a video on this as well. It's in our Revelation series. When the 1,000 years are expired, Satan is loosed out of his prison. It's the time to deceive the nations It's the Great Tribulation, and he deceives Gog and Magog to gather them to battle. And that's what the encompassing of Jerusalem is. It's the spiritual battle of the end time during the Great Tribulation. They went up in the breadth of the earth, encompassed the camp of the saints about, and the beloved city, which is Jerusalem, and fire came down of heaven and devoured them. That's what the end day is going to come quickly. Once we see all these things happening, know that the end is near. Just a quick review on this video. The summary about Jerusalem being encompassed by armies. Jerusalem points to the nominal earthly church, which can include saved and unsaved. To be compassed means besieged. The Babylonian captivity is a great example of that. It's a type of the Great Tribulation. The siege is done by Satan's kingdom. They seek to control the church and overrun the church, which they do. Not one stone will be left upon another. It results in spiritual famine and the devouring of one another. And we see these armies of Satan's kingdom that will be all his people, all those false teachers and false prophets in the church, the kingdoms of the world, the unsaved people of the world, the nations are going to overrun the church. We're going to look in the next video, the desolation. We're going to look at some of the details about the manner in which Jerusalem, which is the church during the Great Tribulation, becomes desolate. Please consider subscribing to this channel, and thank you very much for watching this video.